various films. And tonight we're going to discuss Kenneth Branagh's biopic of sorts of William Shakespeare's last years, titled All Is True, which is also, I believe, the title or one of the titles to one of Shakespeare's last plays. If you just give me
and tonight we're going to discuss Kenneth Branagh.
Sorry about that. I had a bit of a feedback there. I'm just doing some quick housekeeping. If you quickly bear with me, and then we will get started. And that is an alarm downstairs my wife is dealing with, and I cannot deal with it at the moment. It's switched off. Oh, it's not. We have a cooker. So we have a cooker. We have a smoke alarm in the kitchen, which is not a good place to have it, but that's anyway, that's by the by. And hang on, I will, there we go. I may have to go and help deal with it. Hang on. Got to let Mel come in. No, it's all gone. Shut the door. It's horribly frustrating. And here he is. Okay.
Hello.
Hello, Malcolm. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm fine. I've just had the smoke alarm's gone off downstairs. My wife's dinner for us, and don't ask me why. It's nothing to do with us, but there's a smoke alarm in the kitchen, which means at the best of times, we have a problem, and then we always have the kitchen window open when we start cooking, etc. But generally, all good.
Good.
So, for those watching, and as a reminder, we are doing a review of Kenneth Branagh's All Is True, which is not the Shakespeare play, with that title, or one of the titles to a Shakespeare play, if my understanding is correct. But it's also it's about basically Shakespeare's last years, his retirement years, which were only about 3.5 years.
Yeah.
From 1612, which to 1616. Was it 1612 or 1613 the globe burned? 1613, and it starts from there when the globes burnt down. He retires to Stratford upon Avon. First of all, what did you think of the film?
Well, this was the second time that I've seen it or watched it. I went to the cinema the first time, and I remember thinking at the time, what an odd film. But what I really meant by that, I didn't realize it at that moment, because I had the same reaction again as I watched it the last couple of days. It's paced so differently to most films that I see. It's very slow. It's very thoughtful. It reminds me of Lost in Translation a lot.
I can see what you mean by that. Yes.
Yeah, because it's not about things happening. In a way, very few things actually happen. It's about what's going on in their heads, in their hearts. Just like Lost in Translation, which the first time I saw, I thought was so boring. Then the second time and afterwards, thought this film is a work of genius. I'm not sure if All Is True is a work of genius, but I did enjoy it. Really, really brave of Kenneth Branagh to make himself try and look so much like the poster Shakespeare. I did enjoy it very much. Although the slow pacing did take some getting used to again. But that's simply because there are so few films like it out there.
Yeah, it does take a while to pick up, and just when you're getting into the stride, it finishes.
Yeah,
Um, I have to confess, I did have mixed feelings about the film.
right,
What I liked about it, I liked very much. What I didn't like about it, I didn't like.
right, right.
That makes sense, as in I thought, that's perhaps not a good idea. But the things I did like, I love the atmosphere of the film, and I love this thing that you do get a lot of films of period pieces, pre-industrial revolution, is that they used a
Yeah,
lot of candlelight
yeah,
in the
yeah.
evening. It's all you've got this sense of natural lighting. I don't know how. I know I heard when Stanley Kubrick did Barry Lyndon, when they did the gambling table scene, he didn't have any studio lights. It was all done by candlelight, candles everywhere, and in order to get authenticity.
Mm.
Um, I don't know if with the latest one, sorry, with this one, I don't know whether they used any studio lighting or not. Or I say studio lighting, there might have been location time, but you know what I mean. I don't know if they used lighting that was artificial, or whether they just they just relied on candles.
Yeah,
It's
yeah. I don't know enough about how films work to know whether they would have just used candles, although one or two scenes did rather look like it was simply candles being used rather than any studio lighting. But that's a very big feature of the film. It's like watching a Caravaggio painting, the chiaroscuro effect of light and shadow, light and dark. Really, really intense use of it.
and a lot of the most intense scenes, in fact, nearly all the most intense scenes are done in dark at night time.
Yeah,
With
yeah,
whether it's Shakespeare's arguments with his family, or whether it's his effectively declaring his love to the Earl of Southampton, and the Earl of Southampton sort of acknowledging it, but for obvious reasons thinking it was politic to brush that aside.
that was a rather sad scene.
It was a sad scene,
Trying to admit it all to him, and the Earl just, well, initially he gives him the brush off. Know your
he does
place,
both
Mr.
things.
Shakespeare.
He tacitly returns the feeling.
Yes, he then quotes the poem to show
but at
his
the
true
same
feelings.
time, he has to officially brush him off for obvious reasons. It's like this, but that in itself, it does rise to the speculation that everyone's had about Shakespeare and the Earl of Southampton. Was Shakespeare bisexual? Was he just writing poems of admiration of a man? Because it's a way of trying to curry favor of an establishment figure, and he was heterosexual.
On that point, a new book, well, not new, I think it came out last year.
Yeah.
The Shakespeare scholars, or Shakespearean scholars, Stanley Wells and Paul Edmondson, they published a book together about Shakespeare sonnets. I forget its name, but I'd like to read that to see what they have to say, because they rearranged the order to make new sense of it. Especially, I think, in respect of what may be Shakespeare's sexuality, whether he was bisexual or not. That's a book I'd like to read as soon as I can find it. But yeah.
It's interesting, when you get the publicity of the film, you have the three big names: Kenneth Branagh, Dame Judi Dench, and Sarah McKellen. Kenneth Branagh is he?
Yeah, I did notice that when I finished it. The poster. Yeah. Where's McKellen there? He's only in it for 10 minutes.
Yes,
I thought, obviously he's one of the big names.
Yes, he's only in two scenes, effectively, isn't he?
Yeah, yeah.
but I love the brush off he gave to the local MP. But,
Lucy, yeah, he deserved that.
um,
And then he got thoroughly roasted by Shakespeare himself
yes,
later at the end. Yeah.
I also liked it did happen where his daughter Susanna was accused of adulterous behavior,
Yeah.
and it got thrown out of court before it even was presented to court. The person who made the accusation fled. I was surprised. I did my research afterwards. I was surprised to find that actually happened.
It did it?
It did happen.
Oh, right.
But obviously there's
Right.
this stuff about Hamnet not writing and Judith writing it. I hope I haven't got them Judith and Susanna mixed up. I'll have to check. But let's say, for argument's sake, Judith saying that she wrote them, and then it turned out that Hamnet may have committed suicide when it was threatened to. That is clearly fictional.
Yeah.
And I do feel, out of respect to the Shakespeare family, even though they've been gone for over 400 years, or for around 400 years.
Direct line in a way.
Yeah, the last of Shakespeare's direct lineage died in 1670.
Right.
It did feel grossly, and it felt unnecessary. There was a lot of good in the film without having to do that, and there were a lot of side plots. I mean, there are lovely little moments like the person coming up and wanting to ask Shakespeare questions about his plays, and Shakespeare giving audience, and it did feel like a celebrity being accosted by a fan.
Yeah.
So that.
Yeah, it's funny because the Susanna adulteress subplot.
Yes.
That was the subplot that I wondered about. It felt really out of place, like they had put it in there just to give her a controversy. 1 minute it's there, the next minute it's gone, and the way in which it was dealt with felt a bit crummy as well. Would the fellow really have been convinced by Shakespeare telling him, "Oh yeah, this actor is the hardest man in the world, and he'll come and get you"? I mean, if you're spiteful enough or angry enough or whatever to say she's an adulteress, are you really going to be chased off like that?
Yeah,
I'm not so sure. It felt that did feel a bit weak.
Yes.
But, so I didn't realize it actually happened.
Well, that bit did. The bit of, I hasten to add the bit about the Shakespeare issuing the threat and so forth.
Yeah.
That's conjecture. But the fact that a charge had been made and it was dropped before it even reached court, when the person who made it ran off,
right.
that happened.
Right.
One thing I think that's interesting about that is you do get the growth of the Puritan movement, which was growing quite rapidly by then.
Yeah.
Not least as seen by the immigration to the US. That and Puritanism having a strong representation in Stratford. I think that was fascinating. It's because that's where it involves Shakespeare, who Shakespeare, I think, would have been diplomatic about it, but I think had he in the natural lifespan of the 20th and 21st centuries, Shakespeare would still have been alive around about the time of the English Civil War, assuming James I died when he did. And I think Shakespeare, would have been diplomatic and tried to keep out of it. But I think I have a suspicion, and academics will be arguing for and against, no doubt, but this is a gut feeling, and I'm no academic, that Shakespeare would have been a cavalier. But it's fascinating because, I mean, it obviously his son-in-law's is from his eldest daughter's marriage is a Puritan, so it's fascinating to see the culture of the time.
Yeah.
Alongside. So yes, that's
I would dispute his political allegiance if he had lived to see
mm,
the Civil War, only on the grounds that he, it seems he really kept out of taking
Yes.
sides in the life that we know he did have. And
I
would
know,
he
that's
really
why
have
I
taken
said
a
he would.
side
That's
later
why I
on.
said he would have been diplomatic.
Yeah,
But I think I just feel his gut instinct would have been to the Cavaliers. But again, it's hard to say, and we do tend to look in black and white and not nuance at the both sides in the English Civil War. There were parliamentarians who were no fans of the excessive Puritanism of the Cromwell era. They just wanted the things that basically those of us want now, i.e., more democratic accountability.
yeah.
Likewise, you would have had Cavaliers who would have felt honor bound to support King Charles I, and they would have been, I imagine, quietly not too impressed by the king's intransigence on some issues. It ebbs and flows like that, I think. But I mean, that's all an aside. I do think that it's a fascinating look at his last years. I love the cinematography.
Yeah.
The shoot, but there are things I wasn't too keen on. Our mutual friend told me today, saw it at the cinema, and she walked out.
Oh dear.
Yeah, so if you're watching that, I would love to know why. But it's but I do empathise with wanting to look at cinema, because there were moments in the film where I was like, I don't really like that, where it seemed to deviate somewhat. And
Which moments were they?
the bit about Hamnet,
What, the suicide?
yeah,
Right.
I found that that was taking great liberties. I can see sort of on other things, but I mean, but likewise, as I said, it's fairly mixed. There were things I did like. I did like the as I said, the way the film was made, the technical side. I liked Shakespeare trying to settle in back in Stratford after so many years away. I liked those things. So there were, it was fairly mixed, and I do think Kenneth Branagh did try and do justice to it. I think there are things he could have done differently, but I think it's a bit hard, I think, to make, in terms of drama, a 1 hour 30-minute or 1 hour 40-minute, how long was film, about the last 3 years of Shakespeare's life. But who knows? I mean, what did you? Were there things you didn't like about the film?
Now there were, some details of the way the film was written. On the whole, I thought it was written really well, but it did feel like at some points that there was a bit of shoehorning going in, as if the writer, who was Ben Elton, none other.
I thought it was interesting, upstart crow and all that.
Yeah, but I felt that it felt to me like the writer, Ben Elton, had written down a list of bullet points, facts about Shakespeare's life, and then thought, now where can we fit these in to ground this story in the known facts of his life? So they mention the criticism of Shakespeare being an upstart crow, something about Marlowe spying and his affairs with boys and girls together, blah blah blah. The thing with Lucy, Sir Thomas Lucy, about the anecdote that Shakespeare and his father poached some of his deer and all this kind of thing. They didn't feel some of these did not feel integrated enough into the story. They felt like they'd just been shoved in to give it some kind of grounding in reality. And I didn't think the story actually needed them, to be perfectly honest. I thought it was strong enough to stand on its own.
I didn't. Sorry.
I wasn't so fond of the Susanna plot outline, adultery plot, notwithstanding the fact it's based on a real occurrence. Like I said a moment ago, it felt like it came, it was there, and then they moved on to the next thing, or really focusing on Judith. I thought, well, why couldn't they just focus on Judith from the start rather than wasting time with Susanna's story? I guess they wanted to keep her in and they had to give her something to do.
Yeah, I do think it's like, right, it's almost as you said, bullet point. Right, let's first deal with Susanna. Right, dealt with Susanna. Let's deal with the Earl of Southampton. Right, we've dealt with that. Let's deal with Judith. Let's do, an occasional feedback. It's almost like boom, boom, boom. I mean, you're mentioning Ben Elton. I mean, it's very different to Upstart Crow. I mean, even making allowances that one's drama, one's comedy. And incidentally, Kenneth Branagh did guest in an episode of Upstart Crow, but I mean, it's very, very different. And I did think I did compare it in my head to Upstart Crow, believe it or not, but I wasn't aware that they were two,
Right. Yeah, I have to admit, I've not seen that, so I couldn't compare them.
I do recommend Upstart Crow, but I do have a slight degree of bias. The person who played Christopher Marlowe, I was at college with.
Oh, right, okay.
Downey.
Nice.
So
he's
a lovely guy. He's a lovely guy on Twitter, and he was a lovely guy when I was at college with him. We also, in the same year as Charles Tierra, who's wowed everyone as Aaron Burr in Hamilton. So
okay,
this is what happens when you do performing arts at BTEC level, doing A-level literature on the side.
Stars of the future.
You get stars of the future, indeed. So that's I do have a slight bias with Upstart Crow, but I do like the series.
Yeah.
But I do recommend it.
Okay.
But so, what would you give the film out of 5, with 5 stars being excellent and 1 star being excessively poor?
Oh, I'd have to give it a 3 in that case. 3 out of 5. Not without its flaws, but and I don't think it will ever be a favourite film.
No,
but I felt there's certainly enough there to warrant it being called a good film. Yeah, I would definitely give it 3 out of 5.
Okay.
Yourself?
If I was very uncharitable, a 2, but I don't think that's fair because, as I said, where it's good, it is good. I love that scene when it's clear that Shakespeare's already terminally ill, but there's only minor hint of that, where he's with Ben Jonson, and Ben Jonson tells him how wonderful he is now remembered and how he has so much to be grateful.
That was a lovely scene.
Yeah.
How he turned around you get what you deserved.
Yes.
And it was negative at the start, and then he turned it round to make it a positive. That was sweet. I like that, yeah.
And it's like I do love that line. And you're the best playwright ever in this time or in the future. Pause, you bastard.
Yeah, that was very Ben Jonson.
It was, but we all love that, because I think if all of us were even moderately successful playwrights, we'd know instinctively we would feel the same compared to Shakespeare. It's like, who did he seems to effortlessly write all these brilliant plays, and of course he has stood the test of time. I think the names of the only playwrights other people know are Christopher Marlowe and to a certain degree Ben Jonson, and that's it. They're certainly the only other the only other Elizabethan / Jacobin players I've readily heard of.
Well,
And Christopher Marlowe, it's partly because of how he ended up.
yeah.
I
mean, thanks to studying English Lit
yes,
at university and including the Renaissance on one of the papers, I knew the names of all the others. Nash,
yes.
Green, Webster, I think that were mentioned. I couldn't
talking
tell you much
about
about them, but I'd just heard of them. But yes, Joe Bloggs, who perhaps hasn't studied it, probably wouldn't be so aware.
Talking out of necessity, I have to do something, and it's my own foolish fault. I have left the charger for this laptop downstairs, and I've had one of those alarm thingies to tell me it is going to die fairly soon.
Okay, right.
I need to move very, very quickly and get to my charger. And I do apologize, ladies and gentlemen, if you're watching, but this is me being very disorganized. So
we're developing a new concept called video on the move.
Indeed.
While we're moving, or one of us is moving through his house, doing a regular house thing.
A very small house as well, as you can see, but it's cozy. Not as small as the one in Wales, which is in the record books. My goodness. Everything. Have you ever been to the smallest house in Wales? Sorry, the smallest house in Britain, which is in Wales.
Right.
It is tiny. It's on somewhere on YouTube. You see Roy Castle visited in an episode of Record Breakers. I think it's on the BBC archive lot.
Okay.
And, it's about 4 meters by 4.
Wow.
Downstairs, and then there's a ladder going to the upstairs. It's basically roughly the size of this study.
Okay.
Downstairs, and then the upstairs, and that's it.
That's it.
It's tiny.
I've been to T.E. Lawrence's home in Dorset, and that's small enough. Clouds Hill, but it doesn't sound nearly as small as that place.
No. Have you ever been to Shakespeare's home?
I think I have, yeah.
Yes.
Been to Anne Hathaway's. So I imagine I've been to Shakespeare's as well.
Yes.
I don't remember it.
I was going to say, that sounds like you went when you were very young, because I was going to ask whether all is true.
In the noughts, so long enough ago to forget, basically.
Yeah. Because sometime in the 1970s, in other words. I was going to. Sorry, I inadvertently revealed your age there. I do apologise.
That's all right.
But yeah, I was wondering how it felt in terms of authenticity, rather like in Shadowlands. Clearly, it wasn't the kilns wasn't filmed at the kilns in Shadowlands, but it got the feel and the atmosphere of the place.
Yeah, the Shadowlands did really well because the scenery, the environment, was almost a character in the film.
Yes,
Oxford, the dream inspires. How could it not be? They did well to have some pretty substantial shops at Magdalen College. The kilns was not the kilns, but it was a house that looked like it could be C.S. Lewis's house. Yes. So the fact it wasn't the real one probably was neither here nor there. The pub looked old-fashioned, even though it wasn't the Bird and Baby, the Eagle and Child. The All Is True didn't really, I feel, lean on its environment half as much, probably to save money. Shakespeare's house in the film, it looked the part. It looked big enough to be what was supposed to be his house in Stratford upon Avon, according to the pictures, because it's not there anymore, just that garden. But in the film, it appears to be out in the countryside somewhere. And,
and
I don't recall too many shots of in Stratford, I have a feeling they were just saving money on that point. So, I mean, the locations that they did use, they looked authentic, especially that house, excluding the countryside. But it wasn't, I felt, a big part of this production. All the more so because some of the scenes were so bathed in darkness, even indoors. They were really determined to focus on the characters and what they were saying. They weren't so much fussed about where they actually were. It added to the kitchen sink drama-esque nature of the whole production. Yes, it's about Shakespeare, but in a way, it could be about anyone who's going back home after a successful life abroad, so to speak. So it did. Shadowlands was much better on that point than this film, but I don't think it's fair to compare them, because I don't think that was an objective of All Is True, to really ground Shakespeare in a physical, a reconstruction of the physical past.
And yet, I mean, Kenneth Branagh also, who directed it as well as playing Shakespeare, he did. It's very atmospheric, and he did make much of that. It all goes around the conversations at night time. Very, very intense conversations. Conversations that people don't have casually. Conversations about difficult moments in family history. Conversations about about personal sexuality. I mean, they're conversations I imagine you could easily have, but they're not the conversations you just chat with an acquaintance at a pub, is what I mean. And so there is an intensity about that and how they discuss things, and it does concentrate on that. It does feel like it's about Shakespeare wrapping up all the loose ends, and it's more about Shakespeare the man rather than Shakespeare the playwright, and you do see a conflict between the two.
It's quite similar to the film about Tolkien that came out a couple of years ago. In that they hardly ever quote from his books. That's probably because they couldn't get the permissions to do so.
The family weren't too 100% happy, I understand.
Yeah, so they focused instead on the biographical account, on being a biographical account of his life, and foregoing, too much to do with the books, which, to be fair, are years into the future rather than when the film is set.
But he was right. He was planning. The ideas were already entering his mind at that time.
In a primitive fashion, the Book of Lost Tales, they could have made use of that. Goblin, his poem Goblin Feet, he wrote at Oxford, or as a student at Oxford. So they could have made use of the stories in the embryonic fashion version that appear in the history of Middle Earth. But beyond that, I mean, although they do have the Black Rider-esque figure that appears when Tolkien is at the Somme and injured. But but certainly in All Is True, that it's very determinedly about that. I think they've certainly made a conscious decision. We're concerned with Shakespeare the man. We're not talking about although the poet is a big part of the story.
Not least of the Earl of Southampton.
They're really focused on the man rather than the plays.
I mean, I do think there is this. You do get the element of the conflict of that, but also Tolkien, which you referred to as someone at the very start of his literary career. Shakespeare's at the end, and he's determined to be the end. And it's interesting in the world of literature and also in the world of acting. You get a lot of successful people who work and work and work until they're too old and too ill to continue, or they die. You don't often get playwrights, novelists, actors go to a certain point and go no more.
Yeah.
I mean, Agatha Christie was writing novels until almost the very end. And well, I say almost a bit. Shakespeare, I mean, whilst he had about just 3 years, and I mean, some people who worked to just about the very end, they're only stopped by ill health. Shakespeare made a very conscious decision. Sorry, to go, that's it. And
Yeah.
so you do see that, it's like he's like, you do see that in the film, of this element of Shakespeare the playwright is no more. He will always exist in the hearts and minds of many. I can't help that. This is Shakespeare thinking in terms of the film. But Shakespeare the man has got to breathe again. And, you know, a lot of people try, and even his own family almost talk to him as Shakespeare the playwright, when he is trying to conduct his affairs as the man.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it's only towards the very end they see him as both the playwright and the man,
Yeah.
rather than a playwright.
That's understandable, because they've only known Shakespeare the man for the last 20 years, because he's been away so much.
Yes.
They've barely been able to get to know him as a man beyond
Yes.
the plays. So yeah, that's very understandable. But what you say makes me think that Shakespeare in real life was very active. Towards the end of his life, he was buying property in London, down in Blackfriars. But I confess I don't know the precise dates, whether it was prior to Henry VIII burning the Globe down, or if it was afterwards.
I thought for a second you were going to talk about something Henry VIII did, and I was like,
well, he liked destruction, so he wouldn't have been sad about the Globe going up in flames. Yeah, he was. So what I'm saying, in real life, would be interesting to look up to see what about this property, when exactly he bought it, because the film, according to the film, he goes back home, and that's it. He stays there. But I have a suspicion in real life it may have been a bit more complicated than that. Perhaps he was moving back and forth a bit more. But I could be completely mistaken. He could have bought this property prior to the Globe burning, and then afterwards, yeah, he really did go back home and pretty much stay there.
And it was pretty much fated, almost as he is now in his own lifetime. I mean, he was still highly regarded in his last years, and obviously in the immediate years, the fact that they published a folio of his work in 1623, 7 years after his death, shows, I think, that how many highly regarded him. And I mean, one funny, it's not ha funny, but funny, strange postscript to his own life and fame was, people always make a thing about no one knows what Shakespeare looks like. No one knew what Shakespeare looked like. I mean, obviously there's portraits, engravings, but some varied, and it's like, which one is the authentic look? I suppose we'd have to go for the alleged death mask as being closest to the how Shakespeare looked. But one of the tragedies is when they did an excavation, I think, of his body, of his remains, and the skull is missing.
Right.
Someone at some point stole his skull.
I think I vaguely heard of this some point.
Yeah. And you just know the way people are so curious, that with today's technology, if his physical remains were intact, they would have done a 3D of his face, like they did with Richard III, to get, this is how Shakespeare would have looked. And obviously they would have got almost all the portraits have the receding hair and the moustache and a little beard.
Yeah.
So aside from perhaps, was he premature grey, was he fully dark, you would have got, this is what Shakespeare actually looked like.
Yeah.
But we do have the death mask, which obviously is more Shakespeare at the end of his life rather than at his prime, but you do
Yeah.
sort of sense what he looked like. But I think the fact that his skull went missing and this was discovered in the Victorian era just kind of shows how his fame has carried through, where someone was
It's
reduced to
interesting.
doing such a thing.
Yeah, interesting that because he's buried in a church,
Yes.
and it wouldn't be the easiest thing in the world to go into a church without being discovered,
No.
unless you've got the right contacts.
Unless you got the right contacts and unless the sexton was involved.
Yeah. So possibly an inside job, but yeah, that's. I mean, I can't say I'm too disappointed in the sense that I don't mind not knowing what he looked like.
No.
I'm happy to go by the pictures of the death mask.
No.
Desecrating a grave is not good, but
Well,
yeah,
that's the worst bit of it. That's the worst bit.
Yeah,
of it. Obviously, any it's unfair, and
yeah.
Shakespeare does have not him personally, but via the family he was born into. There are relatives of Shakespeare alive today, and that's an insult to them, I imagine.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
But
yeah,
it's I imagine whoever's ended up with the skull didn't realise the importance of the find.
I suspect they knew very well the importance of the find.
I suppose,
kept privately, like paintings are, and its significance probably been long lost.
Yeah. No chance of the irony of it ending up being used in a production of Hamlet then.
Who knows? I doubt it, but who only knows? I would bet it ended up in some stately house and got forgotten. Its identity was forgotten over the years. It could still be somewhere. Or
this is the skull of someone famous. We don't know who it is, but here, in this, yeah.
But
it will probably turn. I mean, things like that do have a habit of turning up. I mean, I was one of those growing up who, when I read on Richard III, I would have told you, right, the most likely thing that happened was that his remains were thrown out the tomb and tossed into the River Soar during the dissolution of the monasteries.
Yeah.
That is what I read, and that's what I thought was the most likely outcome of what happened to his remains. Yet, sure enough, they turned up underneath a car park. So, whether it'll be in our lifetimes or not, I don't know. But I mean, it could well turn up one day, and then,
Well, yeah, I mean, it's perfectly possible, I guess. Yeah. I don't know how you'd prove it was his.
No, DNA,
because it's been removed from its last known resting place. But yeah,
DNA.
Yeah, if there are still, if he still has indirect relations alive,
yeah,
that's possible. Yeah, DNA.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's I kind of hope it doesn't, but it would be a thrill if it did.
Yes. Oh well, but it's so. Would you reckon? As I think we've covered nearly all bases with this film.
Well, we've got, I think, one thing that we haven't mentioned at all, and that's the music.
Okay.
Just like the film uses light and shade a lot, it also uses music and silence an equal amount.
I didn't notice.
For long periods, there seems to be hardly any or no music whatsoever. And then towards the end, it starts to get used a bit more, perhaps as the secrets have come out and Shakespeare comes into a more authentic memory of his family.
And normally, I tend to notice, well, as a rule of thumb, not always, I tend to notice the music in films. This one I didn't. So I couldn't have told you off by hand whether it had music in or not. Patrick Doyle did the film score, Scottish film composer. He also did he's been frequently used by Kenneth Branagh. He did the music to Henry V, Dead Again, Much Ado About Nothing, Frankenstein, Hamlet, Love Labours Lost, As You Like It, Sleuth, for Jack Reacher. Literally almost any film Kenneth Branagh's been in or made.
Okay, he's been there.
He's been there. So he's clearly... He's also done cool gangster films like Carlotto's Way by Brian De Palma.
Oh yeah.
He also did Bridget Jones's Diary, Gosford Park, Calendar Girls. I'm looking at Wikipedia here, so it may or may not be the most accurate, but I mean, it's fascinating stuff. But yes, I never noticed the music.
Yeah,
Never noticed that. So
it certainly doesn't parade itself a lot.
No.
And like I said, it's often not there at all.
It's not like, I mean, a lot of film composers, not many of them are like, say, John Barry or the late John Barry or John Williams.
Yeah.
Where it's like pretty much, they're there, you hear the music. It's pretty much, I would say in your face, but it is in your ears.
It serves the scenes in this film, that's for sure.
Yes.
It doesn't take center stage itself.
No.
Unlike, say, John Williams's music in Star Wars at the beginning, for example.
Oh yes, and the similarity between some of that score and Holst Mars from Holst's Planet Suite. The similarity. If you ever listen to Mars on Holst's Planet Suite, there are moments where you can sense the similarity with Star Wars.
Right.
So if you listen to Mars in all its full detail, and think of Star Wars, you'll see. I'm sounding like those people who say, if you watch The Wizard of Oz and listen to Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon at the same time, you will find. No. There is a connection that you can see the musical, can hear the musical connection.
Right.
But it's interesting that it wasn't much was used. The only other film I think where you rarely hear music, but when it's used well, is the film Being There, which was Peter Sellers' penultimate film.
Okay.
And Johnny Mandel did the music to that, and it's very rarely done. And this music that is most prominent, there's this piano bit that you hear every so often, but that's almost the only bit. And the only other bit that sticks in the mind was something that had been done 7 years before, reworking of Sprach Zarufa, whatever, which was used in 2001: A Space Odyssey. And it was reworked into this 70s funky, bass and keyboard type thing. But it's it's interesting that the music was sparsely used in this. So if I get a chance, I'll see it again and listen out for the music.
It would fit in with the film's thoughtfulness.
Yes.
That it should go for a meditative silence. Shakespeare's turning away from the bright lights and the big city and all the noise that comes with it, going back to the quieter life in Stratford-upon-Avon. So it would make sense that they would be very sparing with the music, and especially until his life starts to brighten up again towards the end, and he gets that measure of peace that comes with knowing the truth about what happened to Hamnet.
Well, that's certainly true. So what will you take away from this film, do you think?
Definitely an appreciation, a greater appreciation of Shakespeare the person. The film may not portray Shakespeare authentically, or any of his family, or anyone else for that matter. Doesn't matter. Not concerned with the truthfulness of otherwise, but it's a reminder. The film's a good reminder that behind those brilliant plays and poems, there was a real person, there's a beating heart. And that's always good to know, to have that awareness. And it might lead me into thinking about that person, who he was, who he might have been, on my own terms. So it could, in a sense, be a springboard. Branner's Shakespeare did nothing with his family for 20 years, came back, found out that his son killed himself and blah, 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 blah. Well, Malcolm's Shakespeare could be this or that. And I have this film to thank now for being a springboard into that kind of consideration. So that, I think, would be my chief takeaway. And certainly not, if not a reawakening, then a bringing back to me of his poems and plays. I watched the film in 2 goes, yesterday and this morning, or this afternoon. I finished it off. And yesterday, after I finished watching it, I went onto YouTube and looked up his sonnets. And I found Sir John Gielgud reading his sonnets. So I just listened to that for a while. The first, admittedly, I think I fell asleep halfway through. But when I woke up, he was on to sonnet 33. So
Noel Coward did say that Gielgud had a voice like a muffled trumpet.
It's yeah. The problem is my only significant experience of him is in Brideshead Revisited. He hams it up a bit as Charles Ryder's dad, because he's quite an extravagant figure. And so listening to the sonnets, I have to try and rid myself of Mr. Ryder. And that's quite tricky because I can hear the traces of him in his voice. But that would be the secondary thing taken away. First, Shakespeare the person, and then a reconnection to his poems, to his plays. So that would be my start. And probably the third would be, because of the Caravaggio-esque nature of the cinematography, I love Caravaggio's artwork. So the film takes me back to him as well. But I don't need to do too much there at the moment because there's someone on Twitter who regularly tweets Caravaggio's artworks. So I get to see them there, if only on a small screen, rather than go and hunt them down.
Well, I mean, what was I going to say? I think what I take from it is, as I said, there's the difference between Shakespeare the playwright and Shakespeare the man, and how we all strive for success. And on one level, that's good, but I mean, the home life and those closest to us are also important, and I think that. Yeah, I mean, there are things. It will never be one of my favourite films, but I mean, there's certainly, as I said, one of the things I liked about it, I did like. So all of that said, and I think we've covered all bases here. As you yourself stated to me privately a few days ago, COVID permitting, the next James Bond film's coming out on my birthday, which
which day is that?
30th September.
Right, okay.
Which is that, so you said, if I remember, you suggested that we look at another Bond film in the run to No Time to Die.
We've got to go for Spectre, don't we? The last one?
Okay, we'll go for Spectre.
I mean, there are probably better choices, but because No Time to Die comes after it.
That is true. That is true. We'll go for Spectre. So we'll arrange in our spare time, the what's, whys, and wherefores, folks.
I look forward to that.
Probably at some point in early mid-September.
Right.
And
before we finish, on the grounds of any other business, I went to the cinema on Saturday.
Yes.
And I saw The Courier.
Oh, Benedict Cumberbatch.
Benedict Cumberbatch. First-rate film. I highly recommend it.
Based on the true story.
For No Time to Die. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'll bear that in mind. It's based on a true story.
It is, and it's set in the late 50s, early 60s,
Yes, he,
Oleg Penkovsky, a Russian GRU agent, decides to pass secrets to the British and to the Americans, and the British and Americans launch a joint operation to get more out of him. And it's a really exciting film. I don't know if it's based on any particular book, but a while ago I did read a book called Dead Drop by Jeremy Duns, which goes into detail into the Penkovsky case. It's called Codename Hero in America, but Dead Drop in Britain, I suppose anywhere else. And really well worth reading about Penkovsky. He was a really, really significant agent.
Yes.
So I recommend both book and film.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's first-rate drama. Really, really, really solid. It's closer to Le Carré than to Fleming.
I said Neville Gwyn, it's Grevillewin.
Grevillewin, that's right.
Grevillewin,
yeah.
yes, 1919 to 1990.
That's right, yeah, not so long ago.
No. It broke his health, the whole thing, which understandable, but it will be it'll be interesting to see. But yes, hopefully we'll be doing Spectre next month, and hopefully, COVID permitting, we will be seeing, or God willing rather, we shouldn't.
Yeah, absolutely.
We shouldn't let COVID have the whole. We'll all be able to see No Time to Die.
It would be very interesting to see James Bond Twitter, who gets there first, and can they keep their mouth shut about the plot, and how long before spoilers become permissible.
We'll know if Kelvin Dyson thinks it's a good film by the way he'll be going on about how he would love to talk about it but feels he can't. But
I think it comes out in Britain before America, so
as it should.
So I don't know, perhaps the guy who does the Bond Experience will come over to Britain to watch it.
Well, being highly original here, I think hopefully it will leave us all shaken but not stirred.
See what you did there, very good.
I know. But it's
full of wit and mischief, like Hamlet's poems.
Yeah, I think the wit in James Bond films is the wit is a big staple of the Bond films. I mean, one of the first things I got in Bond humor was the puns and the play on words and stuff. And I mean, one of the first ones I enjoyed or got was when I saw Moonraker. The first time I saw Moonraker all the way through, I think the first few times I saw it towards the end, etc. And it's when I was only 10 at the time, but you and I got when after Bond's first meeting with Drax.
Yeah. And
Drax goes, just stares ahead, doesn't turn. And Michael Lonsdale was brilliant at the monotonic and doing all range of emotions from saying or doing very little and just staying ahead blankly. And you see Chang comes up behind him and he's clearly aware of Chang's presence, even though he doesn't physically acknowledge him. And he just goes, staying ahead, goes, Chang, look after Mr. Bond. See that some harm comes to him. And I'd always used to hear the phrase "see that no harm comes to someone." See that so to hear "see that some harm comes to him" was the first play on words that even at a young age I was like, yeah, that's I thought that was funny. But I also have a sick and warped sense of humor as well, so
right. Appeals to that.
Yes, indeed. Well, it's good to chat with you,
and you too. Thank you.
And I think, for those who are there, do get a chance to see All Is True. You might find absolutely. It's not all true, but you might find it a worthwhile watch.
If today is the 16th of August, it's on iPlayer for, I think, 14 more days, 2 more weeks.
It
is. After that streaming service, hopefully would have it.
Yeah. Okay, well, have a good week, and
thank you, and you too.
Soon.
Cheers. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.